Number 10. The Voynich Codex. There are books that preserve history. There are books that preserve religion. There are books that preserve forgotten civilizations. And then, there is one book that no one on Earth can read. It has survived wars, empires, revolutions, the rise and fall of kingdoms. It has sat quietly inside libraries for nearly 2 centuries. Hundreds of linguists have examined it. Cryptographers have attacked it. Artificial intelligence has analyzed every page. Yet today, not a single sentence has been translated with universal agreement. Its author is unknown. Its language is unknown. Its alphabet is unknown. Even its purpose remains a mystery. This is the Voynich Codex, perhaps the most undeciphered medieval manuscript ever created. Today, it rests inside the library of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest, protected behind climate-controlled glass. It is surprisingly small, only about 12 by 10 centimeters, small enough to fit comfortably into the palm of your hand. Yet inside those tiny pages lies one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. The manuscript contains 448 handwritten pages. Nearly every page is filled from margin to margin with strange symbols unlike anything found in any known writing system. Scattered throughout the book are dozens of illustrations. At first glance, they seem almost childlike, simple drawings with crude proportions. But their subjects are astonishing. One page depicts the crucifixion of Christ. Another shows soldiers carrying crosses beneath banners decorated with crescents. Elsewhere appear churches, castles, warriors, angels, pagan symbols, and scenes that seem to combine Christianity, Islam, and ancient European traditions into a single narrative. No known medieval culture blended these symbols in quite this way. The images raise more questions than they answer. The manuscript first entered recorded history in 1838. Hungarian nobleman Count Gustav Batthyány donated his family library to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Among thousands of ordinary books sat one extraordinary volume. No librarian could read it. No priest recognized its script. No historian had ever seen anything like it. Researchers immediately noticed something strange. Most alphabets contain relatively few characters. English uses 26 letters. Greek uses 24. Hebrew uses 22. Even Chinese writing, while containing thousands of characters, follows recognizable linguistic patterns. The Voynich Codex appeared to contain somewhere between 150 and 200 frequently recurring symbols, with hundreds of additional variants. Far too many for a normal alphabet, far too few for a logographic language like Chinese. Its writing direction proved equally confusing. Some scholars argued the text runs right to left. Others believed certain sections flowed left to right. Still others suggested the manuscript should be read vertically. Nothing fit consistently. For decades, every attempt at translation failed. During the 19th century, many Hungarian scholars concluded the obvious. The manuscript had to be a forgery. Perhaps an elaborate practical joke. Perhaps an eccentric nobleman's invention. Without a readable language, there seemed little reason to study it further. The Voynich Codex quietly disappeared into storage. For almost a century, few serious researchers touched it. Then computers arrived. In the early 21st century, high-resolution digital scans allowed researchers to examine every symbol mathematically. Instead of asking what the characters meant, computer scientists asked a simpler question. Did they behave like language? The answer surprised everyone. Statistical analysis revealed recurring patterns. Certain symbols consistently appeared together. Some combinations behaved like prefixes. Others resembled suffixes. Character frequencies followed distributions similar to genuine human writing, rather than random invention. In other words, the manuscript possessed internal structure. Whether that structure represented a real language, a sophisticated cipher, or an entirely artificial writing system, no one could say. But it almost certainly was not random nonsense. In 2018, Hungarian researchers Levent Zoltán Károlyi and Gabor Tokaj proposed one of the most ambitious interpretations yet. They argued the manuscript used a specially designed symbolic writing system rather than a conventional alphabet. According to their reconstruction, parts of the text may contain Christian prayers, biblical paraphrases, and religious narratives dating to the late 16th century. Other experts disagreed almost immediately. Alternative theories continue to appear. Some researchers believe the manuscript encodes an unknown form of Hungarian. Others suggest Romanian, Sumerian, early Turkic, artificial symbolic notation, or an elaborate encrypted code whose key has long been lost. Even artificial intelligence has entered the investigation. Modern language models have analyzed the manuscript alongside famous undeciphered texts such as the Voynich Manuscript in Linear A. Yet no proposed translation has gained scholarly consensus. Every breakthrough is followed by new contradictions. Every solution creates fresh problems. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not the language itself. It is the person who created it. Who spends years writing 448 pages by hand, illustrating nearly every chapter, using a writing system that no one else seems to have understood? Was it intended to hide dangerous knowledge? Protect religious teachings during an age of persecution? Or was it a masterpiece created for an audience of exactly one? The author carried that answer to the grave. Perhaps that is why the Voynich Codex continues to fascinate historians. It is not merely a book no one can read. It is a voice, still speaking across the centuries. A voice that has never fallen silent. Only one that humanity has forgotten how to understand. Number 9. The Lost Crown Jewels of King John. Some mysteries begin with murder. Others with vanished treasure. But this one began with a king, desperately trying to outrun death. It was October 1216. England was collapsing into civil war. French armies had invaded. Powerful English barons had rebelled. And King John, the monarch forever remembered through the legend of Robin Hood and the signing of the Magna Carta, was fleeing across eastern England. With him traveled something almost beyond value: the royal treasury. Gold, silver, jewels, sacred relics, royal seals, ceremonial swords, the crown itself, everything that symbolized the authority of the English monarchy. Then, somewhere along the vast tidal marshes known as the Wash, the treasure disappeared. Not stolen, not hidden, simply gone. More than 800 years later, no one has ever found it. The final days of King John's reign were filled with disaster. After years of political conflict, much of England had turned against him. His enemies invited Prince Louis of France, later Louis VIII, to claim the English throne. John was forced to move constantly, leading what remained of his loyal army through the eastern counties. By October, he had reached the region of King's Lynn, carrying the royal treasury in a long baggage train. Contemporary chroniclers describe dozens of wagons heavily loaded with valuables. From there, the king planned to cross the Wash, a vast estuary separating Lincolnshire from Norfolk. Even today, the area is dangerous. At low tide, large sections become exposed mudflats stretching for kilometers. At high tide, the sea returns with astonishing speed. Strong currents, hidden channels, soft sinking mud. Modern warning signs still caution visitors against attempting the crossing without local guides. In the 13th century, the danger was even greater. According to the medieval chronicler Roger of Wendover, John chose one route while his baggage train attempted another. Somewhere during the crossing, everything went wrong. The incoming tide arrived sooner than expected. Wagons became trapped in deep mud. Horses panicked. Wooden carts overturned. The sea rushed inland. Within moments, the king's treasure disappeared beneath water and silt. Roger of Wendover wrote that the wagons were swallowed up by the sea. Another chronicler, Matthew Paris, repeated a similar account only a few decades later. Neither writer witnessed the event personally, yet both preserved remarkably consistent descriptions. The loss was catastrophic. Among the missing items were believed to be royal jewels, official documents, expensive tableware, weapons, church treasures, and perhaps even the medieval English crown. Exactly what was being transported remains uncertain, because no complete inventory survives. Some historians suspect the chroniclers exaggerated the scale of the disaster. Others believe the treasure was even larger than the surviving records suggest. Only days after the incident, King John himself died at Newark Castle, probably from illness, although dysentery has long been considered the most likely cause. His 9-year-old son became King Henry III. England slowly recovered. The treasure did not. For centuries, treasure hunters have searched the Wash. The problem is geography itself. The coastline has changed dramatically since the 13th century. Rivers shifted. Sediment accumulated. Entire channels disappeared. Land that lay underwater in 1216 now lies beneath farmland. Other areas have vanished beneath new marshes. Finding the exact crossing point has become almost impossible. Modern archaeologists have employed ground-penetrating radar, aerial photography, historical mapping, magnetometry, and geological reconstruction. Metal detector enthusiasts have searched nearby fields. Professional expeditions have surveyed former tidal channels. Yet despite hundreds of years of searching, no confirmed royal treasure has ever been recovered. Some isolated medieval objects have been discovered in the region: coins, weapons, fragments of equipment. None can be definitively connected to King John's lost baggage train. Several alternative theories have emerged. Perhaps the treasure was never lost at all. Some historians suggest portions may have reached safety, while chroniclers exaggerated the disaster for dramatic effect. Others argue that local survivors quietly recovered valuable objects before official search parties ever arrived. If so, the treasure may have been dispersed long ago without leaving any record. Still others believe it remains buried beneath meters of sediment, somewhere beneath the Wash. Waiting, invisible beneath farmland and marsh. The mystery continues to fascinate archaeologists because it combines three irresistible elements: a documented historical event, a known geographical region, and an extraordinary reward. Unlike many medieval legends, no one doubts that King John existed. No one doubts he crossed eastern England in October 1216. No one doubts that something significant happened to his baggage train. The mystery is not whether a disaster occurred, it is where and exactly what disappeared beneath the tide. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is this: England's greatest lost treasure may never have been stolen. It may never have been hidden. It may simply have taken the wrong road, on the wrong day, as the sea quietly reclaimed everything a king believed could never be lost. Number 8. The Dancing Plague of Strasbourg. History remembers countless wars, countless famines, countless epidemics, but only once did an entire city begin dancing itself to death. No music, no celebration, no festival, just people, moving uncontrollably through the streets, hour after hour, day after day, until their feet bled, their muscles failed, their hearts gave out. Some collapsed from exhaustion, others reportedly died where they stood. It sounds impossible, yet it happened, and more than 500 years later, science still cannot fully explain why. The event began in July 1518 in the prosperous city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire and today located in eastern France. According to contemporary records, a woman known simply as Frau Trophäa stepped into the street one warm summer morning and began to dance. At first, her neighbors assumed she was celebrating, or perhaps suffering some personal emotional crisis. But she did not stop. Hours passed, then an entire day. By the second day, she was still dancing. By the end of the week, something even stranger happened. Other people joined her, not by choice. One after another, men and women began dancing with the same frantic, uncontrollable movements. Within a month, contemporary chroniclers claimed that between 300 and 400 people were caught in this strange phenomenon. The city had never witnessed anything like it, nor had Europe. The records describing the outbreak are unusually detailed. City council documents, medical reports, chronicles written by local observers, even official financial records. Together, they paint a disturbing picture. Victims danced continuously for days. Some screamed in pain. Others begged for help while their bodies refused to stop moving. Many collapsed from dehydration, strokes, heart attacks, or complete physical exhaustion before rising to dance again. Physicians of the time faced an impossible diagnosis. Rather than blaming demons or witchcraft, several doctors concluded the victims suffered from what they called hot blood. Their treatment now seems almost unbelievable. They encouraged the dancing. Authorities hired musicians, professional dancers, even constructed wooden stages where sufferers could continue moving until the illness supposedly left their bodies. Instead, the epidemic grew worse. Eventually, the city reversed course. Music was banned. Victims were transported to the nearby shrine of St. Vitus, where priests performed religious rituals intended to cure the mysterious affliction. Gradually, the outbreak faded, almost as suddenly as it had begun. Then it never happened again on the same scale. The obvious question remains: what caused it? For centuries, one explanation dominated: ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that infects rye, producing toxic compounds chemically related to LSD. Researchers suggested contaminated bread may have triggered hallucinations, muscle spasms, and uncontrolled movement. At first glance, the theory seemed convincing, until neurologists looked closer. Ergot poisoning causes severe convulsions, intense pain, and impaired circulation. Victims usually cannot dance continuously for days. The symptoms simply do not match the historical descriptions. Most medical historians have now largely rejected this explanation. Another possibility involves mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria. This phenomenon occurs when extreme psychological stress spreads physical symptoms through entire communities without an infectious pathogen. Modern medicine has documented outbreaks involving fainting, trembling, uncontrollable laughter, and temporary paralysis. 16th century Strasbourg was a city under enormous pressure. Repeated crop failures, famine, disease, religious conflict, economic hardship, fear permeated daily life. Some psychologists argue these conditions created the perfect environment for a collective neurological crisis. The theory explains several aspects of the outbreak, but not all. Why dancing? Why such prolonged physical endurance? Why did so many independent witnesses describe nearly identical symptoms? Other researchers have suggested neurological disorders, poisoning, epilepsy, encephalitis, or combinations of multiple medical conditions. None fully account for every historical record. The dancing plague remains one of medicine's greatest unsolved mysteries. What makes the event especially compelling is the quality of the evidence. Unlike medieval legends passed down through folklore, the Strasbourg outbreak was documented by city officials while it was happening. Council records survive, medical reports survive, financial accounts survive. This was not a story invented centuries later. People watched it unfold with their own eyes. And they were just as confused as we are today. Modern neuroscience has advanced enormously since 1518. We can map the human brain, sequence the human genome, study neurological diseases at the molecular level. Yet, when confronted with the dancing plague, science still cannot produce a single explanation accepted by everyone. Perhaps that is what makes Strasbourg so unsettling. It reminds us that history is filled with mysteries that are not hidden beneath the ground, not locked inside ancient tombs, not buried beneath forgotten cities. Sometimes, the greatest mystery is human behavior itself. Because somewhere in the streets of medieval Europe, hundreds of perfectly ordinary people began dancing. No one knew why. No one knew how to stop them. And 5 centuries later, neither do we. Number 7. The Voynich Manuscript. There are books that no one has read, and then there are books that no one can read. Not because they are damaged, not because pages are missing, but because the language itself seems to belong to no civilization that has ever existed. For more than 6 centuries, the Voynich Manuscript has challenged kings, monks, linguists, cryptographers, mathematicians, intelligence agencies, and now, artificial intelligence. Every generation believes it will finally solve the mystery. Every generation fails. Today it remains one of the most famous unsolved puzzles in history. A medieval book that appears perfectly ordinary, until someone tries to understand a single word. The manuscript takes its modern name from Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish antiquarian book dealer who purchased it in 1912 from the Villa Mondragone, a Jesuit college near Rome. Among hundreds of forgotten manuscripts, one immediately caught his attention. Its pages were filled with elegant handwriting unlike anything he had ever seen. There were no recognizable Latin letters, no Greek, no Hebrew, no Arabic. Instead, hundreds of strange symbols flowed across every page with astonishing consistency. It looked like a real language, yet no one recognized it. The book itself is surprisingly modest. Approximately 240 surviving vellum pages, although evidence suggests several pages are missing. Beautiful colored illustrations appear throughout, botanical drawings, astronomical diagrams, circular maps, constellations, naked women bathing in mysterious pools connected by green pipes, bizarre plants that resemble no known species on Earth. Every page seems carefully planned. Nothing appears random. For decades, researchers wondered whether the manuscript might actually be a Renaissance forgery. That theory largely collapsed in 2011. Scientists at the University of Arizona performed radiocarbon dating on the parchment. The results placed the vellum between AD 1404 and 1438. Long before Voynich discovered it, long before modern forgers possessed the scientific knowledge necessary to fake medieval parchment so convincingly. The manuscript itself was genuinely medieval. The mystery had just become much deeper. Linguists soon noticed something extraordinary. Unlike random symbols, the writing behaves like a real language. Certain words appear frequently. Others occur only once. Some symbols consistently appear at the beginning of words. Others almost always appear at the end. Statistical analysis reveals grammatical structure remarkably similar to natural human languages. The text even follows Zipf's law, a mathematical pattern found in nearly every known language on Earth. Random gibberish rarely does that. Neither do simple substitution ciphers. The manuscript appears almost alive, as if someone truly intended it to be read. Over the past century, hundreds of theories have emerged. Perhaps it records an unknown European language. Perhaps an extinct dialect. Perhaps an elaborate encryption system protecting forbidden knowledge. Some have claimed it was written in medieval Hebrew. Others proposed Nahuatl, Chinese, Turkish, Latin abbreviations, even an extraterrestrial language. None have survived serious scrutiny. Professional cryptographers have repeatedly joined the search. During both World War I and World War II, some of the world's leading code breakers, including experts who successfully cracked military ciphers, examined the manuscript. If anyone could decipher it, surely they could. They could not. Even modern computing has struggled. Artificial intelligence has scanned every page. Neural networks have searched for hidden linguistic patterns. Machine learning algorithms have compared its symbols against thousands of known writing systems. Each new study uncovers intriguing similarities, but no translation accepted by the scholarly community. One reason the manuscript remains so difficult is that there is nothing to compare it with. The Rosetta Stone unlocked Egyptian hieroglyphs because it contained the same text written in multiple languages. Linear B was deciphered because researchers could compare recurring place names. The Voynich manuscript offers no such clues. No bilingual inscription. No known alphabet. No historical references. No author's name. Only silence. Perhaps the illustrations offer the greatest hope. Researchers divide the manuscript into several distinct sections. A botanical section filled with impossible plants. An astronomical section featuring zodiac symbols. A biological section showing women immersed in elaborate water systems. A pharmaceutical section containing jars, roots, and herbs, and pages of mysterious diagrams that seem almost mechanical. Some believe these images describe medieval medicine, others suggest alchemy, astrology, natural philosophy, or knowledge deliberately disguised to prevent outsiders from understanding it. Yet every interpretation eventually encounters contradictions. No explanation solves everything. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not what the manuscript says. It is why someone invested years creating such a masterpiece. The handwriting remains remarkably consistent throughout. The illustrations required immense patience. The parchment itself was expensive. This was no casual experiment. Someone devoted an extraordinary portion of their life to producing this book, then vanished, leaving behind no explanation, no key, no translation. Perhaps that is why the Voynich Manuscript continues to fascinate the modern world. It reminds us that knowledge can survive, while its meaning disappears. A civilization may preserve its words perfectly. Its ink may endure for 600 years. Its pages may remain untouched by time, and still, its voice can become completely lost, waiting patiently on a library shelf, for someone who has not yet been born, to finally understand what it has been trying to say all along. Number 6. The Princes in the Tower. Every kingdom has its ghosts. England has two. They were not warriors. They did not die in battle. They never ruled. They simply disappeared. For more than 500 years, historians have searched for the truth behind one of the greatest royal mysteries in European history. Two young princes entered the Tower of London. Neither was ever seen again. No body was officially identified. No murder weapon was recovered. No confession was ever proven. Only rumors, politics, and centuries of suspicion. Even today, science cannot tell us exactly what happened. The story begins in April 1483. King Edward IV died unexpectedly at the age of 40. His eldest son, Edward V, was only 12 years old. Too young to govern alone. According to tradition, his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was appointed Lord Protector, responsible for preparing the young king's coronation. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Richard met his nephew on the journey to London. The young king was escorted to the Tower of London, where English monarchs traditionally stayed before their coronation. A few weeks later, his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, joined him inside the fortress. The brothers were reunited. Then, they slowly vanished from public view. Servants reported seeing them playing within the tower gardens, then only at windows, then not at all. By the end of the summer of 1483, no reliable witness ever reported seeing either prince alive again. Meanwhile, everything around them changed. Richard declared that Edward IV's marriage had been legally invalid. If true, both princes were illegitimate and therefore unable to inherit the throne. Parliament accepted the claim. Richard was crowned King Richard III. England had a new king. The two rightful heirs had disappeared. Almost immediately, rumors spread across the kingdom. Some whispered they had been murdered. Others believed they had been secretly moved elsewhere. Still others insisted they remained alive in hidden captivity. No one knew. The mystery only deepened after Richard III himself was killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, ending the Wars of the Roses. The new Tudor dynasty had every political reason to portray Richard as a ruthless child murderer. Yet, even Tudor historians could produce no definitive evidence. The first detailed accusation came from Sir Thomas More, writing several decades after the events. His account claimed the princes were suffocated in their beds on Richard's orders. Later, William Shakespeare immortalized this version in his play Richard III, transforming the king into one of literature's greatest villains. The story became accepted by millions. But historians have always been cautious. Neither More nor Shakespeare witnessed the events. Both wrote years later. Both relied upon second-hand testimony, influenced by Tudor politics. The historical record remained frustratingly incomplete. Then, nearly 2 centuries later, workers made a remarkable discovery. In 1674, laborers renovating the Tower of London demolished part of an old staircase. Hidden beneath it, they uncovered a wooden chest containing the skeletons of 2 children. Many immediately believed the mystery had finally been solved. King Charles II ordered the remains placed inside Westminster Abbey, where they remain today. Yet certainty never arrived. The bones were examined several times over the following centuries. The most important scientific study occurred in 1933. Researchers concluded that the remains probably belonged to 2 children of approximately the right ages, but preservation was poor. Important bones were missing. no definitive identification proved possible. Modern DNA analysis could potentially provide far more reliable answers. Unfortunately, the remains have never been subjected to comprehensive genetic testing. Repeated requests for new examinations have been declined, largely out of respect for the royal burial site. Without DNA, the identities remain uncertain. The mystery has produced countless alternative theories. Perhaps Richard III ordered the murders. Perhaps another nobleman acted independently. Perhaps Henry VII, the first Tudor king, eliminated the boys after taking the throne. Some researchers even argue that at least one prince escaped entirely. Several men later claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, most famously Perkin Warbeck, whose supporters insisted he was the surviving prince returned from exile. His claim nearly destabilized the Tudor monarchy. Whether he truly believed his own story, or merely served as a political pawn, remains unknown. Even archaeology has offered only fragments. Excavations within the tower continue to reveal new information about medieval royal life. Documents continue to be re-examined. Forensic historians continue comparing contemporary accounts. Yet no discovery has answered the central question: who killed the princes? Or were they ever murdered at all? Perhaps that is why the princes in the tower remain one of history's greatest medieval mysteries. The Tower of London still stands. Millions walk through its gates each year. They pass the ancient walls where two children once lived their final known days. Somewhere within those stones, the truth almost certainly existed. But history has a habit of keeping its darkest secrets, especially when kings have something to gain from silence. Number 5. The Cathar Treasure of Montségur. Some treasures are measured in gold, others in the secrets they carry. High above the valleys of southern France stands a lonely mountain fortress. Steep cliffs surround it on nearly every side. From a distance, it seems impossible to reach. Yet for centuries, people have climbed these slopes, searching for something that may never have existed. A treasure. Not just any treasure. One that disappeared on the very night an entire civilization came to an end. This is the mystery of Montségur, and the legendary treasure of the Cathars. A mystery that has survived for nearly 800 years. Long before treasure hunters arrived, Montségur was the last great refuge of the Cathars. The Cathars were a Christian religious movement that flourished across southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries. Their beliefs differed sharply from those of the Roman Catholic Church. They rejected much of the Church's authority, lived lives of extreme simplicity, condemned wealth and violence, and believed the physical world itself was fundamentally corrupt. To medieval church leaders, these ideas were more than theological disagreement. They were heresy. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade, one of the bloodiest campaigns ever fought against fellow Christians. For more than 20 years, northern French armies gradually conquered Cathar strongholds across the region. One fortress remained, Montségur. Perched nearly 1,200 meters above sea level, its position made direct assault extraordinarily difficult. The castle became both a military refuge and the spiritual center of the remaining Cathar community. By 1243, however, its isolation had become a trap. A royal army surrounded the mountain. Hundreds of defenders and Cathar believers found themselves trapped inside the fortress. The siege lasted for approximately 10 months. Food slowly disappeared. Supplies dwindled. Escape became almost impossible. Eventually, the defenders negotiated surrender. The fortress would be handed over peacefully, but those who refused to abandon the Cathar faith would face execution. Then, something remarkable happened. According to several medieval chronicles, just days before the surrender, 4 Cathars secretly descended the nearly vertical cliffs under cover of darkness. Not through the main gate, not by fighting. They climbed down the mountain carrying something. No chronicler tells us exactly what it was, only that it was important enough to risk certain death. A few days later, on March 16, 1244, more than 200 Cathars chose to be burned alive rather than renounce their beliefs. Montségur fell. the Cathar religion gradually disappeared. The four men never reappeared in the historical record. Their mysterious cargo vanished with them. Almost immediately, legends began to grow. Some believed the escapees carried enormous quantities of gold and silver belonging to the Cathar Church. Others argued the Cathars possessed almost no wealth at all. Their beliefs emphasized poverty. Why would they preserve treasure? That question led to far more extraordinary theories. Perhaps the object was not financial. Perhaps it was spiritual. During the 19th and 20th centuries, writers connected Montségur to one of history's greatest legends, the Holy Grail. According to these stories, the Cathars had secretly guarded the Grail for generations before rescuing it from the fortress at the last possible moment. The theory inspired novels, documentaries, treasure expeditions, and eventually popular culture around the world. The problem is simple. There is no medieval evidence linking the Cathars to the Holy Grail. The association appears centuries after the Cathars disappeared. Modern historians generally reject the idea as romantic speculation rather than historical fact. Yet the mystery remains, because the four men almost certainly did carry something. Several contemporary sources mention the escape. Archaeologists have spent decades investigating Montségur itself. Excavations directed by researchers including Jean Guillain and others have uncovered fortifications, domestic buildings, weapons, ceramics, coins, and everyday objects from the siege. The evidence paints a vivid picture of life inside the fortress. What it has not revealed is any hidden treasury. No secret vault, no buried gold, no sacred relic. Modern technologies, including ground surveys, architectural analysis, and archaeological excavation, have found nothing capable of explaining the legend. Some historians now believe the mysterious cargo may have been far less dramatic. Perhaps important religious manuscripts, lists of Cathar believers, sacred ceremonial objects, or documents containing theological teachings the survivors hope to preserve. If so, the treasure may never have been valuable in monetary terms, only spiritually. And if those documents were later destroyed, the treasure disappeared forever. Perhaps that is why Montségur continues to fascinate archaeologists, not because anyone has found the treasure, but because history records the moment it vanished. 4 people climbed down a mountain, carrying something worth risking everything for. They escaped into the darkness, and with them, one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the Middle Ages. Whether they carried gold, a sacred relic, or simply the final memory of a dying faith, no one has ever discovered where their journey ended. Perhaps the greatest treasure was never hidden beneath the mountain at all. Perhaps it disappeared the moment the last witness stopped speaking. Number 4. The Holy Grail. There is no object in medieval history more desired, more searched for, or more impossible to prove. Kings have sent expeditions in its name. Knights devoted their lives to finding it. Crusaders crossed continents, believing it might still exist. Even today, churches across Europe quietly claim to possess it. Yet after more than 8 centuries of searching, no one can say with certainty what the Holy Grail actually was. A cup? A bowl? A sacred relic? Or simply the greatest legend the Middle Ages ever created? Unlike many medieval mysteries, the story of the Holy Grail did not begin in the Bible. The Gospels mention the Last Supper, where Jesus shared wine with his disciples. But they never describe the cup itself as possessing miraculous powers. They never call it the Grail. That idea appeared much later. Around AD 1180, French poet Chrétien de Troyes introduced the mysterious Grail in his unfinished romance Perceval, The Story of the Grail. Curiously, his Grail was not even described as a cup. It appeared as a magnificent serving vessel carried through a mysterious castle during an elaborate procession. No explanation was given, no origin revealed. Readers were left with questions rather than answers. Over the next century, other writers transformed the object completely. The German poet Wolfram von Eschenbach described the Grail as a miraculous stone that descended from heaven. Meanwhile, Robert de Boron connected it directly to Christianity, claiming it was the cup used by Jesus during the Last Supper and later employed by Joseph of Arimathea to collect Christ's blood after the crucifixion. That version became the one most people know today. From that moment onward, the Holy Grail ceased to be merely a literary object. It became history's greatest lost relic. According to medieval tradition, Joseph of Arimathea carried the Grail westward after the resurrection. Some legends placed it in Britain, others in France, Spain, Italy, even the Middle East. Every generation proposed a new hiding place. Every generation believed it might finally be found. One of the most famous claimants sits inside the Cathedral of Valencia in Spain. Known as the Holy Chalice of Valencia, the cup consists of a polished agate bowl mounted upon later medieval gold decorations. Scientific analysis suggests the stone vessel itself may indeed date between the 4th century BC and the 1st century AD, making it old enough to have existed during the lifetime of Jesus. But age alone proves nothing. There is no historical chain of custody linking the chalice continuously back to 1st century Jerusalem. Another famous candidate is the Sacro Catino in Genoa. For centuries, it was believed to be carved from emerald. Modern analysis later revealed it is actually made of green glass. Its association with the Grail largely collapsed. Elsewhere, legends point toward Glastonbury Abbey in England, the fortress of Montségur in southern France, the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, and countless hidden caves, monasteries, and castles across Europe. Each claim tells a compelling story. None has produced conclusive archaeological evidence. The search for the Grail reached new heights during the 19th and 20th centuries. Romantic historians, treasure hunters, secret societies, even political movements attempted to associate themselves with the legendary relic. Perhaps most notoriously, members of Nazi Germany's Ahnenerbe became fascinated by Grail legends, hoping ancient relics might symbolize mystical power or historical legitimacy. Their expeditions found nothing. Modern archaeology approaches the question differently. Researchers no longer ask simply, where is the Grail? Instead, they ask, did a single historical object ever inspire the legend? Or did multiple traditions gradually merge into one story over centuries? Many historians believe the Grail is best understood as a literary creation, influenced by Christian symbolism, Celtic mythology, and medieval ideals of kingship and spiritual purity. Others leave open the possibility that an authentic 1st century chalice survived long enough to inspire later traditions. At present, no evidence can settle the question. The Holy Grail remains beyond archaeology's reach. Not because scientists refuse to investigate it, but because the evidence itself has almost entirely disappeared into legend. Perhaps that is why the Grail has endured longer than any treasure. Gold can be melted. Kingdoms can collapse. Cities can vanish. But an unanswered question can survive forever. Because somewhere in Europe, inside an ancient cathedral, a forgotten monastery, or perhaps nowhere at all, may rest the object that inspired the greatest quest of the Middle Ages. And after 800 years of searching, humanity still cannot decide whether it is looking for a relic or chasing a story that became too powerful to ever be found. Number 3. The Turin Shroud. There are relics that inspire devotion. There are relics that inspire skepticism. And then, there is one relic that has managed to divide scientists, historians, theologians, and forensic experts for more than a century. A simple piece of linen, just over 4.4 meters long, bearing the faint front and back image of a man who appears to have been crucified. For millions of Christians, it is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. For others, it is the greatest medieval forgery ever created. The problem is, neither side has been able to prove its case beyond doubt. This is the mystery of the Turin Shroud. Perhaps the most scientifically studied religious artifact on Earth. The shroud first entered unquestioned historical records in the 1350s, when it appeared in the small French village of Lorey. It was displayed by the knight Geoffroy de Charny, attracting pilgrims from across Europe. Almost immediately, questions arose. Even the local bishop expressed doubts, suggesting the cloth might be a painted image created to attract visitors. Yet devotion continued to grow. Over the following centuries, the shroud passed through noble families before eventually finding its permanent home in Turin Cathedral, Italy, where it remains today. At first glance, the cloth seems ordinary. The image is barely visible. In fact, it is easier to see in photographs than with the naked eye. That discovery changed everything. In 1898, Italian photographer Secondo Pia was granted permission to photograph the shroud. When he developed the glass negatives, he was stunned. The photographic negative appeared to produce a remarkably lifelike positive portrait. The face suddenly became clear. The body appeared three-dimensional. It was as though the image itself behaved like a photographic negative, centuries before photography had even been invented. The discovery transformed the Turin shroud from a religious relic into one of history's greatest scientific mysteries. Throughout the 20th century, researchers from countless disciplines began examining the cloth. Chemists, physicists, forensic pathologists, textile specialists, microscopists, historians. In 1978, an American research team known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STURP, conducted the most extensive scientific examination ever performed. Using infrared imaging, X-rays, ultraviolet fluorescence, spectroscopy, and microscopic analysis, they spent nearly 120 continuous hours studying the linen. Their final report reached an unexpected conclusion. They found no evidence that the image had been painted, no brush strokes, no visible pigments capable of producing the entire body image. The discoloration appeared to affect only the outermost fibers of the linen, penetrating far less deeply than ordinary paint. Even more unusual, the image contains subtle three-dimensional information. Modern image analyzers can convert brightness levels into surprisingly accurate surface relief. Ordinary paintings do not behave this way. Yet, the researchers also admitted something equally important. They could not explain how the image was formed. Then came the experiment that seemed to solve everything. In 1988, laboratories at the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology independently performed radiocarbon dating on samples removed from the cloth. The results appeared definitive. The linen dated between AD 1260 and 1390, squarely within the Middle Ages. To many scientists, the debate was over. The shroud was medieval. Case closed. Except, the mystery refused to disappear. Over the following decades, critics questioned whether the small sample used for radiocarbon testing truly represented the original cloth. Some textile experts argued it came from a repaired corner added after a devastating fire in 1532. Others suggested centuries of contamination, handling, smoke, or biological material may have influenced the results. The scientific community remains divided over how significant these factors might be. Meanwhile, new technologies continued producing unexpected findings. Studies identified traces of pollen from plants native to the Middle East, microscopic particles consistent with limestone found around Jerusalem, blood residues identified as human blood, although contamination over centuries makes interpretation difficult. Some researchers even reported nanoscale changes in cellulose fibers, unlike those produced by ordinary pigments. Each discovery generated headlines. Each also attracted criticism. No single line of evidence has convinced the entire scientific community. Perhaps the greatest mystery remains the image itself, despite decades of experimentation. No researcher has successfully reproduced every known characteristic of the Turin shroud using medieval techniques. Many partial explanations exist: chemical reactions, natural aging, heat, pigments, radiation hypotheses, microbial activity. None explains every observed feature simultaneously. Importantly, none of this proves the shroud wrapped the body of Jesus, nor does it prove the cloth is a medieval forgery. The evidence remains incomplete. Science has narrowed the possibilities without reaching a final answer. Perhaps that is why the Turin shroud continues to fascinate the world. It sits at the intersection of history, faith, and science. Three disciplines searching for the same truth, yet often speaking different languages. More than 600 years after it first appeared, the linen still refuses to reveal its secret. And perhaps that silence has become its greatest mystery of all. Number 2. The Death of Edward II. History usually remembers how kings lived. It rarely forgets how they died. But one English king left behind a mystery so extraordinary that even today historians cannot agree on whether he died at all. According to the traditional story, King Edward II of England was imprisoned after being overthrown by his own wife and her ally. Months later, he died inside Berkeley Castle under mysterious circumstances. For centuries, rumors claimed he had been murdered in one of the most infamous assassinations in medieval history, a death so brutal that it entered legend. But what if that story was never true? What if England's fallen king escaped and lived for years under a different identity? The evidence is surprisingly difficult to dismiss. Edward II became king in 1307, inheriting a powerful kingdom from his father, Edward I, known as the Hammer of the Scots. Unlike his formidable predecessor, Edward proved deeply unpopular. His reign was marked by military failures, political instability, financial crisis, and bitter conflicts with England's nobility. His close relationships with favorites such as Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser the Younger only intensified tensions at court. By 1326, everything collapsed. Edward's wife, Queen Isabella, joined forces with the exiled nobleman Roger Mortimer and invaded England. The rebellion spread rapidly. Many nobles abandoned the king. Edward attempted to flee, but was captured. Early in 1327, Parliament forced him to abdicate in favor of his 14-year-old son, who became Edward III. The former king was taken into captivity. Officially, he would never leave alive. On September 21, 1327, news spread across England that Edward II had died at Berkeley Castle. Public mourning followed. His body was displayed. He was buried with royal ceremony at Gloucester Abbey, now Gloucester Cathedral. For most people, the story ended there, but almost immediately, rumors began to circulate. One account claimed Edward had been murdered with a red-hot iron inserted into his body to leave no visible wounds. It was horrifying, memorable, and almost certainly a later invention. Modern historians have found no contemporary evidence supporting this famous story. The gruesome tale appears decades after Edward's death and was likely created to emphasize the cruelty of his enemies. The real mystery emerged years later. In the 1870s, French archivist Alexandre Germain rediscovered an extraordinary document known today as the Fieschi Letter. Written around 1336 by an Italian cleric named Manuel Fieschi, the letter was addressed to King Edward III. Its contents stunned historians. According to Fieschi, Edward II had not died in Berkeley Castle. Instead, he escaped imprisonment with the help of a sympathetic jailer. Disguised as a common traveler, he fled England. He journeyed through Ireland, crossed into continental Europe, eventually living as a hermit near Sacima in northern Italy. If true, England had buried an empty legend while its former king quietly lived abroad. At first, most historians dismissed the letter as fantasy, but the more closely researchers examined it, the more intriguing it became. Fieschi possessed detailed knowledge of events surrounding Edward's imprisonment, details that were not widely known. Some information appears surprisingly accurate, enough to prevent scholars from rejecting the document outright. Another mystery soon appeared. In 1338, a man known as William Legales arrived in Germany claiming to be the living Edward II. Remarkably, King Edward III sent trusted officials to meet him. Rather than immediately dismissing the claimant as an impostor, the king treated him with unexpected respect. Official financial records even show payments associated with the mysterious visitor. Why? If Edward III knew his father had certainly died, why investigate the claim at all? Several historians suggest the answer may lie in politics. If Edward II had survived, his continued existence could threaten the legitimacy of the new king. Others argue Edward III merely wished to expose a dangerous fraud before rumors spread further. The evidence remains ambiguous. Modern forensic science has little to work with. Edward II's tomb still exists inside Gloucester Cathedral, but it has never been opened for modern DNA testing. No confirmed skeletal analysis has ever established whether the king actually lies inside. Until such evidence exists, the question remains unanswered. Today, most historians continue to believe Edward II probably died in captivity during 1327. The surviving documentary evidence still favors that conclusion. Yet the Fieschi letter refuses to disappear. It remains one of medieval Europe's most puzzling historical documents, not because it proves Edward escaped, but because no one has been able to explain convincingly why it was written, or how its author knew so much. Perhaps that is why Edward II's death continues to fascinate scholars. History tells us where he was buried. Legends tell us how he died. But somewhere between those two stories lies a possibility that refuses to vanish. That one of England's most controversial kings may have watched history write his obituary while he was still alive. Number 1. The Children's Crusade. History remembers great armies, knights in shining armor, kings leading thousands into battle. But in the year 1212, Europe witnessed something that has never happened before, or since. Not a crusade led by warriors, not an army commanded by nobles, but a movement said to be led by children. According to medieval chronicles, tens of thousands of boys and girls abandoned their homes. They believed God had chosen them to succeed where Europe's greatest kings had failed. They would march peacefully to Jerusalem. The sea would divide before them. The Muslims would convert without bloodshed, and the Holy City would be reclaimed. It was a beautiful dream. Almost none of them ever returned. What happened to them remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the Middle Ages. The story begins in France, during the spring of 1212. A shepherd boy named Stephen of Cloyes, believed to be around 12 years old, claimed that he had encountered a mysterious pilgrim. The stranger, Stephen later said, was actually Jesus Christ in disguise. He handed the boy a letter intended for King Philip II of France, calling for a new crusade. Unlike previous crusades, this one would not depend upon swords, only innocence. Stephen began preaching throughout the countryside. His message spread with astonishing speed. Villagers gathered to hear the young shepherd speak. Many believed he possessed miraculous powers. Some claimed he healed the sick. Others insisted birds landed beside him while he preached. Within weeks, thousands of followers had joined him. At almost exactly the same time, a remarkably similar movement emerged in Germany. Its leader was another young shepherd, Nicholas of Cologne. Like Stephen, Nicholas believed God had chosen ordinary people, not powerful rulers, to achieve what Europe's armies never could. His followers marched south across the Alps toward Italy. Many never survived the journey. The crossing was brutal. Mountain passes, snow, starvation, disease. Medieval chronicles describe exhausted children collapsing beside narrow paths while others continued forward, convinced that reaching the sea would trigger divine intervention. How many people actually joined these movements remains fiercely debated. Some medieval writers claimed 30,000, 40,000, or even 50,000 participants. Modern historians believe those figures were probably exaggerated. Yet even conservative estimates suggest the movements involved several thousand people, an extraordinary event by medieval standards. The greatest mystery begins when the marchers reached the Mediterranean. According to later traditions, the sea did not part. Instead, two merchants offered to transport many of the pilgrims free of charge. The children boarded several ships, then vanished. One version of the story claims storms destroyed the vessels near Sardinia. Another insists the merchants betrayed the pilgrims, selling them into slavery in North Africa. Some chronicles describe survivors eventually reaching Muslim markets. Others never mention ships at all. No contemporary source provides a complete account. The evidence simply dissolves. Historians today disagree about almost every aspect of the Children's Crusade. Did it truly consist mostly of children? Or did medieval chroniclers misunderstand the Latin word pueri, which could also describe poor laborers, servants, or landless young people, rather than literal children? Were Stephen and Nicholas leading separate movements, or did later writers merge different events into one dramatic story? Did thousands really disappear, or did most participants quietly return home after their hopes collapsed? No definitive answer exists. The surviving chronicles contradict one another repeatedly. Some were written decades after the events. Others copied earlier accounts containing obvious errors. Each version adds details missing from the last. Separating fact from legend has become almost impossible. Modern scholars generally agree on only a few points. Large popular religious movements did occur in 1212. Stephen of Cloyes and Nicholas of Cologne were almost certainly real individuals. Thousands of ordinary people, many of them undoubtedly young, participated. Beyond that, the historical record becomes increasingly uncertain. No archaeological discovery has solved the mystery. No hidden archive has appeared. No forgotten shipwreck has been identified with certainty. The fate of most participants simply disappears from history. Perhaps that is why the Children's Crusade continues to haunt medieval historians. It is not merely the story of a failed pilgrimage. It is the story of ordinary people placing absolute faith in a miracle and walking toward an ending that history never bothered to record. Most medieval mysteries leave behind castles, artifacts, skeletons, or buried treasure. The Children's Crusade left almost nothing, only names, fragments of chronicles, and an unanswered question that has echoed for more than 8 centuries. Where did they go? Perhaps somewhere along the roads of medieval Europe, the answer was lost forever. Not beneath the earth, not inside a forgotten ruin, but inside the lives of thousands of people who simply walked out of history and never walked back.